Oh, perfect. No idea. I owe, I owe her drink. Yeah. I'm gonna go after it. That's what we said yesterday. Yeah, we're such a cheap drinks.
We're
What
going.
do you think these?
We're going out. What do you think the
Mike's on.
professor's
Mike's on.
doing?
Mike's on. Mike's on.
We got it.
Wait.
You should actually go. That would be
Free
really great.
drinks. Oh my.
Midday date.
Hey team, team, we're gonna take a team picture, quick.
We're going over here, right?
Yeah, in the center.
Everyone line up.
Can the bulbs be turned on? AV.
Oh,
The bulb on. Turn the. Mine okay.
Yeah, I mean,
gone better.
could have been better. Yeah.
We've gone better. We were very repetitive with our information. Felt very repetitive.
Gotta stretch the 20 minutes though, you know.
Yeah. Also, I didn't know who the audience was gonna be. We could have gone really high level with them.
Good what?
We
Yeah.
don't need them. We don't need them.
Thank you for having me. Just for a little bit of context, we've been teaching business here for about 125 years. Just a little bit. And one of our new programs that we've been working on in collaboration with Calvin Nobles and his faculty is a bachelor's degree in economics and cybersecurity. One of the few that exist. And it's set to launch this fall. So we're very excited about this program, and we hope that it can lead to students who specialize at the interface of economics and cybersecurity and understand the costs, not just the benefits, but also the costs of cybersecurity. So that's pretty exciting. I wanted to talk to you a little bit today and give some data-oriented context based on research I've done. I've written a number of papers on privacy and technology and data regulation, and this is kind of the flip side of data security, right? Because when you regulate data security, when you regulate cybersecurity, you also have to be cognizant of privacy. What are the implications for privacy? Keeping data not only secure, but also private. And it turns out that, at least from a regulatory perspective, privacy has been a big focus and also has a lot of implications. And the implications spill over to cybersecurity. So as part of that, I worked at the Federal Trade Commission for several years and wrote reports on the activity of technology companies, large technology companies. Think GAFAM, or Google, Apple, Facebook, Amazon, Microsoft. Obviously, Google is now Alphabet, Facebook is now Meta, but you get the idea. And one of these reports came out less than 2 years ago, and it focuses on technological expansion through mergers and acquisitions in the technology space. So I wanted to show you just a little bit of data here for context. These are acquisitions of data-intensive firms by the leading technology groups, including GAFAM, but also others, like Verizon, like AT&T, like Cisco, like Intel. And you'll notice that there's an upward trend here. More and more startups, smaller companies that operate in data-intensive spaces are being acquired. And they're being acquired both because data is valuable, but also because cybersecurity is not necessarily easy. And the bigger companies have the ability to comply at relatively lower costs. It gives them an advantage. And so there's a concern that if we overregulate, we can actually concentrate the market by leading to more acquisitions taking place. So there's this kind of trade-off between addressing cybersecurity on the one hand, maybe privacy as well, and on the other hand, being cognizant of the fact that we want to encourage competition. We want to encourage innovation. We want the market to not be concentrated. And so you can see that tension. If you don't believe me that there is this tension, let me at least convince you that technology companies are being acquired by firms across the economy. So these are different sectors, from finance to information to services, supply chain, trade. And you notice that all of them acquire technology companies. Obviously, these sectors are a little broad, but we can dig into them. And these are all public firms, publicly traded firms that acquire technology companies. We can dig into these sectors. So for instance, these are services, supply chain, and trade broken down into finer industry verticals. And you'll notice that even real estate, even administrative services, even arts and entertainment, accommodation and food, everybody acquires technology companies. And what are these technology companies known for? Well, harvesting, processing a lot of data. So data is permeating across the economy, across sectors. And so obviously cybersecurity is an issue. And the data tells us it's an issue. If these firms are not using best practices, more and more data will get exposed. Now, I also want you to be mindful that firms across different technological attentiveness are acquiring these technology companies. It's not just high-tech firms that are acquiring. It's also traditional firms that have no high-tech exposure that are acquiring these technology companies. They have no expertise in cybersecurity. All right? So this is a problem. Now, if you look at the relatedness of the acquiring firm to the acquired firm, they're often unrelated. In most of the cases, in the majority of the cases, they're unrelated. This means that data-intensive targets, have these broad cross-sectoral appeal. They're acquired by firms across sectors, and they're acquired by firms who operate in entirely different industries. So this beautiful picture is a way to measure competition among firms. Basically, you can use publicly available data, mostly reports, like 10Ks, quarterly reports, to assess overlap between the products that firms sell. And you can use this measure to gauge competition and how competition evolves over time. So it turns out that firms acquire technology companies because they're facing more and more intense competition in their core business areas. So technology is a way to differentiate. It's a way to get out from that intense competition and differentiate your offerings. But at the same time, by doing so, you're encountering new problems, like cybersecurity. So this progression of where cybersecurity is becoming a bigger and bigger issue is not going to stop, because more and more firms are becoming technological firms through acquisitions. It is also the case that acquiring technology companies is associated with higher valuations. So public firms have an incentive to acquire technology companies because it raises their market capitalization, raises their value. So all of this means that we need to think carefully about regulation in this space. And so how do we evaluate the effects of regulation? Suppose we're interested in learning about the effects of regulation that pertains to data, pertains to cybersecurity, on innovation, on market efficiency, on entry and competition. Right? These are all good things that we want. And in the technology space, a lot of innovation is driven by startups. So one way to evaluate this is to look at historical patterns where there was some sort of regulation and see what it did. So I did one of these projects where I looked at the GLB Act, the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act in financial markets in the US. And if you're unfamiliar with it, Gramm-Leach-Bliley introduced data regulation to finance. There's not a lot of sectors in the US economy that are regulated as far as data goes. One of them is health, another is finance, and another is children. And those are kind of the big three. Getting data on health is a little hard, so I stuck to finance for this one. And in the finance world, I was able to get data on a natural experiment that occurred in California in the San Francisco metropolitan statistical area. And in that particular area, after GLB was enacted in the early 2000s, 5 counties considered adopting their own more restrictive ordinances. And 3 out of the 5 counties, Alameda, San Mateo, and Contra Costa, adopted an opt-out approach, meaning that financial firms were able to trade borrowers' data unless they opted out. The 2 other counties, San Francisco and Marin, adopted an opt-in approach, meaning that lenders could not trade your data unless you opted in. It's a little confusing, huh? The difference is the default. Under opt-in, the default is that your data cannot be traded. Under opt-out, the default is your data can be traded. And since this is a heavy decision, most consumers go with the default. So the opt-in basically means a ban on trading your data. And the opt-out means it's free range. Your data is free game. So that's the difference. Now, you might wonder about the implications of this. I mean, it seems like kind of a minute thing, but the implications are huge. They're huge. And in fact, when you look at the data as far as, say, mortgage rates or actual mortgages that were provided, in the counties that adopted the effective ban, meaning opt-in, less data was collected, but there was less efficient matching between borrowers and loans, and higher mortgage prices and higher defaults and foreclosures. So this little decision of opt-in versus opt-out is actually a very big decision. And from a legal perspective, from an implementation perspective, it has major implications. So this was in the early 2000s. And you might say a lot has changed since then. I mean, we just talked about generative AI. That didn't exist then. The AI explosion hasn't happened until at least 2016. So what's going on there? Well, even though this happened in the early 2000s, it already gave us some early signs about implications for something else, GDPR. GDPR is the European Union's General Data Protection Regulation. It's this omnibus, sweeping regulation that pertains to data security, data privacy, and anything data related. GDPR rolled out in May 2018, about 5 years ago. And since then, it has been updated, and there's talk now of GDPR 2.0, which is in some sense a band-aid or patch to fix GDPR. So to look at GDPR, I look to my own work in the theoretical realm that focuses on data compliance, privacy compliance, cybersecurity, data security, and what the predictions are for the empirics, for the data. And what the theoretical literature predicts is that if we enact these sweeping regulations on data and we switch them to, say, opt-in from opt-out, there are going to be major consequences for innovation because the disproportionate impact is going to be on the startups. And that can be good or bad, right? You might argue, I don't trust these startups. Why should I give them my data? They have the worst cybersecurity practices. Right? They have little to lose compared to the big companies, or maybe everything to lose. I mean, it depends on how you look at it, right? So it's a question whether this is good or bad, but it is a question that remains to be tested in the data. And so the hypothesis here is that new data restrictions, or restrictions on data flows that are created by GDPR, may harm investment in technology ventures. Okay, that's the hypothesis. So to give a quick recap about GDPR in case you're not familiar, it allows for consumers to have more control over their personal data. It encourages an opt-in approach, in most cases, unless you have legitimate interest or contractual obligation to provide certain services. And in practice, many firms go with the opt-in consent approach because it's easier. You just have that annoying pop-up window. Although some large firms prefer to go with other approaches. Meta or Facebook famously went with the contractual legal basis approach up until a few days ago in the European Union, where it switched to a legitimate interest regime because it was forced to do so by the European Data Protection Board. Not by the Irish Data Protection Commission, which oversees Meta because Meta is headquartered there in Europe, but by the European Data Protection Board, which overruled the Irish DPC to impose this change. And right before GDPR rolled out in May 2018, we're told by Bloomberg that the biggest companies are on track to spend $8 billion or so to comply. May 25, 2018 is the effective date, and right around that time is also when the largest platforms, including GAFAM, Google, Apple, Facebook, and the like, released their policy changes, which caused massive indirect effects on the smaller companies which rely on them. So I think I already kind of suggested that there is heterogeneity in terms of the enforcement of GDPR, which is a different story, and this is all a live issue. So this is, as of a few months ago, the Irish DPC, the Data Protection Commission in Ireland, imposes a fine on Meta of about 400 million euros, and this was issued at the behest of the European Data Protection Board after it pushed for a fine to be issued. GDPR, in its actual articles, allows for there to be a lead supervisory authority. In this case, it's the Irish DPC. the GDPR also encourages at the same time a consistent application of the regulation, and it also establishes this protection board which aims to oversee this consistent regulation. And the protection board can intervene if it perceives that something is not done adequately, and its decisions are legally binding. And the board is basically its own power structure that's separate from the European Union, has a lot of authority. So this is the first time that the board actually kind of pushed its nose into the the business of the supervisory authorities, the local supervisory authorities. So it's fascinating, and it's happening in real time. So we're seeing this since December. The board rules that the Ireland DPC needs to do something else, and the Irish DPC is suing the board because it's overruling its decision. And in real time, as of about 12 days ago, Meta is going to let European users opt out of some targeted ads, but only in Europe. I mean, this is just fascinating. So keep in mind, for a time, Meta did not even give users the option to opt in, let alone opt out, because it argued that it has the contractual basis to use the data. And of course, this is very technical, and there's a lot of finer points to it, but just to give kind of a gist of it. So this is all a live issue, but let's get back to the impact of GDPR on startups, okay? Because that's what we're interested in testing here. So the data set I used for this particular test comes from two large database companies. One is Venture Expert, which is a subset of Refinitiv. Refinitiv was spun out by Thomson Reuters and then acquired by the London Stock Exchange, I believe. It's a large company. Crunchbase, another database company, was also spun out into its own entity. I'm focusing on the data through the end of 2020, even though I continued this analysis through the end of 2021. Of course, the pandemic comes into play, and I have some controls for it when I extend the data, but I'm going to focus on the earlier period that's pre-pandemic, just for the sake of not getting into the robustness checks and things like that. The data covers everything that has to do with startup financing. All the deals, the seed rounds, the Series A, Series B, and so on. All those funding rounds that startups raise, and investor information about where the investors are located, how much they invest, and things like that. And just to give you a sense of the data, this is a little snapshot of what some of it looks like. You see the company, the venture name, or the startup name, how much was invested in a round, when it happened, and so on. And we can summarize the data in various ways. And for point of comparison, I'm going to contrast the US and the EU, because GDPR primarily applies to the EU, even though it applies to European citizens who live abroad and things like that. But we're going to focus on a comparison between the EU and US. In the actual analysis, I look at the entire world. So I compare different regions, different countries in the world. And if you compare the kind of the startup scene between the EU and the US, you'll notice that it's slightly different, but not entirely so. So the median dollar amounts that are raised per deal on average are higher in the US. The average number of investors per deal is higher in the US. The firm age is a little bit, looking at startups, older in the US. And the average deals per month is much larger in the US. Most of the money is raised by the older firms, but most of the deals are happening by the younger firms. So this pie chart shows that most of the deals are in the blue chunk, which are the firms that are at most 3 years old. And we can see it in a bar chart as well. Most of the deals are happening for the youngest firms. So if GDPR is to have an effect on these companies, the largest impact is likely to be felt by the youngest firms, because that's where the regulation can really change the business model of the firm. If I'm going to create a business model that's based on using your data, and the regulation comes in and says I can't do it, well, I have to change what I'm doing. So I'll be brief. Just to give you another way to look at the data here, this is a bubble chart. It shows that most of the deals for the youngest firms are at the seed stage, at the very, very early stage, and then the bubbles kind of get smaller and higher as the firms get older, because they're raising fewer rounds and more money per round. And same thing as we move up in age, firm age, the bubbles are smaller and higher. Most of the deals are happening in California, the UK, Germany, and France. And that is not to say that there are no deals happening elsewhere. We can see New York is on there, we can see Illinois is on there, and Texas. Right? The shades are a little bit hard to notice, but those are some of the key states in the US. And we also have to factor that Brexit happened towards the end of this sample period, so there's controls for that. If you look at the raw data, look at the second line on the right, or the first line on the right, that's when GDPR actually took effect, May 2018. The lines on the top are the US funding rounds and the rest of the world funding rounds. The line on the bottom, the red dashed line, is European Union funding lines. And I hope you can see that shortly after May 2018, the gap between those lines expanded. And again, this is raw data. This is not a statistical analysis. This is just raw data. And you can see that GDPR is having an impact. This is the same thing about the dollar amounts, raw data, dollar amounts raised by these companies. So now let's get to the statistical analysis. So again, very, very brief. This is controlling for all sorts of factors, cutting it up by firm age, cutting it up by whether it's more data related or less data related. This is all focusing on the companies that are acquired. And you can see that the major impact is on the youngest companies at the earliest seed funding rounds for companies that are more data related and are more consumer facing. All right? This is the impact of GDPR on European startups relative to the US. And the comparison relative to the rest of the world or other countries is similar. So whether it is positive or negative to kill off a huge chunk of these European startups, that's its own discussion. I'm not getting into that discussion. I'm just presenting the statistical results here. Right? But as another insight, the impact on foreign investors was the largest. These are foreign investors or American investors investing in Europe or investors from the rest of the world investing in Europe. The impact on them was the largest. And again, this is raw data, and you can see the impact right away after GDPR. So that is, just to summarize, there are consequences to data regulation. Some of these consequences have to do with the impact on venture investment, on innovation, on consumer surplus, on economic efficiency, right? And policymakers have to be cognizant of that. They have to think about that. They have to think it through as they're regulating. If they don't, it will lead to a suboptimal outcome. So there is that complexity that has to be factored in. But here's something that's going to be particularly interesting to you. After GDPR was enacted, the data and security sector saw an explosive growth. And this growth happened not just in the EU, but in the US as well. All right, so at least there is some bright spot to this whole thing from that perspective. And I'll stop here. Any questions, please? That's a good question. So this particular data set focuses on the headquarters location of the company, right? Just to be clear, if a U.S. company is headquartered in the U.S., it will be counted as a U.S. company even if it services European citizens. But it's certainly a relevant question because you might service citizens all over the world, right? And in fact, I cannot name names, but there are some very large companies in the U.S. that stopped collecting European data altogether after GDPR, simply froze it. Just point blank. no more collection in Europe until we understand this regulation better. So in that sense, the data is sort of a crude proxy based on location regarding who you're targeting. But in practice, the firm is going to be subject for the laws that govern the users it's servicing. And the US and Europe has had this whole kind of privacy shield fiasco going on over the last several years with the Max Schrems lawsuits that have impacted Privacy Shield, and now we have Privacy Shield 2.0. And it's still not over because those cases are ongoing. So it's a complicated issue. But if we look at it from an aggregate perspective, right, this is not just one firm. This is an aggregate perspective involving over 100,000 observations. Having that crude proxy is sufficient, statistically sufficient. Now, at the individual firm level, you're absolutely correct. There are those nuances, and those nuances are important. Any other questions? I know we're a little bit over time here. If there are questions, please feel free to shoot me an email. Otherwise, I'm here on the 4th floor, so you can come pay me a visit. Thank you very much for your attention.
All right, up next we have Steve Mascarelli to introduce our next keynote speaker.
So next up at the GCSI here is Edward Marcheka, PhD. This is a long introduction that I'm going to condense, okay? So we're going to start with Edward's academia background with Lake Forest Graduate School of Management that you're currently with. Previously, Edward was involved with Western Governors University, Excelsior College, Colorado Technical University, Career Education Corporation, and Elgin Community College. Currently, Edward is the CIO of Prior Health and the founder of 3LC Solutions, who's done a lot of very famous metrics work around Chicago. Many of us know Edward from the Gift of Hope Organ and Tissue Donor Network, where he was the CIO and the CISO. And then a challenging job, I'm sure, of being the CISO of Chicago Public Schools. Prior to that, Thermo Fisher Scientific and Geeks on Call. And here's Edward.
I have a 3:30 train, so you're going to get the Cliff Notes version of this presentation here. This is fun. So this is the story of how I not only renewed my cyber insurance, but also how I saved 27%. So thanks for coming. I had a much better intro. But that's me, and there's my LinkedIn profile if you want to read that whole big, giant bio. I really want to get into nuts and bolts of this stuff. Of course, the legal, there. This is all my fault, not my company's. All right. See, got through that part real quick. I actually have a timer on my watch because I need to catch this train. So for the framing, I want to give it just a little bit of background on the insurance market. So the cyber insurance market right now is about a $6 billion market in the U.S. Cyber insurance claims over the last 3 years are up 100%. No surprise. The claim amounts are up over 200%. So more people are filing claims, and they're for bigger and better amounts. The average payout's $345K. Because most of the breaches are happening to small and medium enterprises, which the report that I read was less than $2 billion organizations, which is kind of like a duh factor because most organizations are less than $2 billion, but they're the ones who are getting breached. We only hear about the mega breaches because it's fun and exciting, but even those take years to litigate, and the dollar amounts actually end up becoming small when you look at it per record. The thing with all of this, though, is that more and more places are finding it harder to renew their cyber insurance. And if they are, they're seeing 50%, and breached organizations, those who had ransomware events, are seeing 400% increases in their renewals. So the fact that we actually got to renew and had a decrease was huge. So that's why this is a big deal. So I'm going to give you like what we did, a little bit about that. So there's two views that we took on it, and for some reason, all the pictures that I ended up with today involved cats. I don't know why. Thank you, Canva, when I was doing my word searches. And like, oh, yep, cats, that works. So one inside, one outside. So the external view, I'm going to put up some, there's going to be some things on this next slide. You're going to be like, oh, I can feel the eye rolls already. But there's a reason, okay? So yes, there's a cat looking in. So the first is, yes, I used my security scorecard report, and I know that's like a bad word in this industry, but to be fair, that's one way that the insurers are looking at you. So we took our security scorecard report, which for nonprofits through the ISAC was free for so many licenses. But either way, we got it free for the organization that I was with at the time. And we fixed a lot of the issues. Now, some of them were trivial and barely moved our score, like fix your CSP headers and a couple of really dumb things that like didn't really move the risk posture. But there were other things that were found. Like we had a vendor managed solution, and it was in their environment, but it had our domain attached to it. It was mobile.company for our BCDR communications. That server had a critical vulnerability on it. Found out through security scorecard. So we called them up. We're like, hey, you need to fix this because it's making us look bad to our insurers who are doing external scans. So find external scans. So another one was our provider's dashboard. Our current insurance provider did external scans and said, we find this risky. We don't like this. So we fixed that. Because the insurer is telling you, we're not going to renew you if you don't fix this. Duh, go fix it. And it was some obvious things and some easier things that had to be done. And the last was we use CISA scans. So if you're critical infrastructure, you can get scanned by CISA for free. You just got to fill out their application, sign up for it. I'm in the process of doing it for Prior Health right now because we're healthcare, so critical infrastructure. Therefore, why not? Why not get someone else to do that stuff for you? It gives you that external view, and then you can actually give them not only your websites. So an argument we used to make too about our websites too is one, they weren't hosted on-prem, and so if you compromised it, I don't care. The other piece was our website was not critical to our business. That I was in. Like you could take it down and guess what? We'd still be in business. It didn't matter, core business offering thing. It was informational. So, I know marketing, they'd freak out. Oh my God, the website's down. I'm like, so? and it didn't matter. It was completely disconnected from us. Yeah, it'd be like maybe, if you compromised it and got in and defaced it, maybe, but so what? So the CISA scan, we scanned our actual environment and all our other ones. And again, they'll do that for free. There's the website if you want to take a picture. Okay. So you can get the Cliff Notes version of this. So then there's the internal view. So I remember 10, 15 years ago filling out cybersecurity insurance forms, and it was like 37 pages about encryption. Not one question about identity, which baffled me. Who remembers those days where it was like, do you encrypt your databases? No. Do you encrypt all your physical servers? No. Why not? Because if you can break into the building, break into the locked room, de-rack the cabinet, and walk out of the 13th floor, you win. And so, but if you compromise the database administrator's password, they're like, we don't care about that. Not one question about identity, all about encryption. So this is what we did. We focused on our internal metrics about identity, encryption, because they still asked about that, but it was more about the endpoint because then they realized that the endpoint is where the actual data is, and if you don't encrypt the endpoint, then you get all the goodies. It's easier to steal a laptop than it is to steal a server out of a locked room. Surprise. When you have drills making noise, people tend to pay attention. Backups was a huge thing, and then EDR and MDR. Backups because they're asking tons of questions about ransomware. So are your backups XYZ, and are they disconnected, and can you restore them? Okay. Disclaimer, this is an eye chart and it's meant to be that on purpose. For the whole list, just go to my LinkedIn profile. It's a featured post. But I'm going to talk about some of these. The first is time for admins to be notified of users added to super user groups. So we did this through our MDR provider. Is Kasi here? Who's an organizer? John, can I talk about products? Is it free? Are you an organizer, John? All right, so I use Rapid7 for that, for my MDR. It worked really well. It was able to tell us who was doing, getting elevated permissions within our environment. So anytime, even good, it was like, hey, who's doing that? And then the next two, number of events of interest detected by URL requests, and the number of devices not required to utilize URL filter. So we used Umbrella for that one. Are you looking at the devices, things that are calling home in the kill chain, right? stop that. And then average number of users clicking on phishing tests, employees targeted for training, number of clicks on last phishing campaign, use KnowBe4 for that one, to get that done. So we're measuring these things internally because these are the types of things that the insurers are asking questions about. The next couple are all about malware and endpoint protection. So I used SentinelOne for EDR on that, and it was absolutely fabulous if you have their service. Just the product alone, I mean, the product alone works well, but when you get someone else to actually look at the alerts, it's wonderful, because then you get the alert like, hey, we found this thing and we're looking at it, we've quarantined it in the meantime, and then it's like, oh, that's your own script, never mind, whitelist. So, and then the backups, so percent of successful backups, results of periodic restores, so it's good thing, it's one thing to have backups, it's another thing to see if it's actually worthwhile, and not just data, but bare metal restores. How many of you are doing that? Not many people do. Percent of systems without current backups not available on online OS calls, and time to notify when a backup has failed. Usually we all eventually get nearly 100% backups, but how many are first pass resolution? I remember working at a place and our first pass was 85%. We had so much work to do on backups. We actually celebrated when we got to 99.8. I actually sent my boss the Gladiator, "Are you not entertained?" meme. I felt very triumphant then. Especially when we were backing up like nearly a petabyte of data when we were doing full backups. It was fun. Percent of devices not required to use MFA, and percent of remote access. I mean, the new insurance questionnaires are all about like 2FA and MFA, and like you already asked me this question, and especially when you go out to bid, like the broker will hit up a whole bunch of organizations. Like, why can't there just be one application? They all ask the same thing. It's frustrating. And then percent of critical data devices with encryption and databases with encryption. So, oh yeah, so the MFA one, that was Duo. I really actually liked it, not only because it was easy to use, we had a great rollout with it, but Duo has the help desk push, which I know has come up many, many times in our the CISO community of how do you verify a user when they call in. There's a help desk push button where the help desk can push a button, and then the user gets the thing, and they have to read the code off. So unless you have a swim, less likelihood of compromise with the Duo push application. Critical devices with encryption, BitLocker, surprise. We were a Windows shop. So these are some of the key critical metrics, but there's a whole list. I got like 140 of them on my LinkedIn profile if you want to get all those freebies and goodies there. But by managing to these, we were able to help head it off. And I grabbed a Sun Tzu quote, and I think it's so appropriate for this type of thing. And it goes, if you know the enemy and know yourself, you need not fear the result of 100 battles. And it's so true. So not only did I know what the insurers were looking at, I knew exactly what was going on in my environment as I was going to respond to them. If you know yourself but not the enemy, for every victory gained, you'll also suffer defeat. So if you don't know the external view that the insurers are looking at, you don't do anything about it, you're toast anyways, because you can have the best controls and the best environment, but if it looks like crap from the outside, I had one insurer that they refused to even talk to us because we had an open SIP port. A SIP port. It's for voice. It has to be open. They wouldn't even like have a conversation. So, all right, well, I didn't want to work with them anyways. They probably wouldn't have covered us. You had a breach. Well, we're not covering you. Yeah, one of those things. And then the last piece is if you know neither the enemy nor yourself, you will succumb in every battle. So if you have no idea what's going on, you're totally screwed anyways, which is true. Okay, so at the end result, we put a little bit of money in, yes, but our cyber insurance was not only renewed, but we ended up having a 27% decrease in our premium by addressing those external concerns and by managing our environment internally against some actual cybersecurity metrics, which I gave a sample of today with those, and the particular tools to help manage those, because sometimes people come up here and you're like, you should measure things, and then they don't tell you how to do it. All right, so that was the Cliff Notes version. I ran through that really, really, really fast because, like I said, I want to make this train. What questions do you have? I've got 6 minutes. Yes?
Quick question. Do you have this done as what my answers were before and my answers were after? In other words, at 100% and 73%?
Oh, yeah. So the big differences was our internal. our internal controls got better, so our different metrics that we were measuring. And then we addressed a couple of those external facing concerns. So our security scorecard score, I think, went from a 78 to a 98 over the year between by just addressing those couple of things. Like, I know we hate the product as a overall, but it's how you're being viewed. And a general rule of thumb is like, if you're a B or better, you're okay, especially if you're evaluating vendors. That's for those of us who live and breathe this every day. When you're dealing with an underwriter, man, they want it to be locked up. So there you go. Richard.
Yeah. Quick question. On the renewal, did you stay with the same
Yes.
provider?
No, it ended up being the same one. So the one that, with that second bullet point of using their report of did you fix stuff that they found, they ended up renewing us. Through a broker. Yeah, broker went out to bid for us many times, and it was the same company that ended up renewing us. They were even shocked that, like, the underwriters gave us a discount. The broker was. He was like, holy cow, I haven't seen this. I was just glad we got renewed.
Are there other areas you had to look at from a self-insurance perspective? Say, well, look, we're not going to have coverage for this. We're just going to ride it out, see what happens?
It was with respect to the limits that they chose that. Look, we can do our quantitative risk assessment, and you'll end up with more risk than your business is worth, generally, is what happens. And so no one believes you at that point. It's like, we got $50 billion worth of risk, and it's like, we're a $100 million company. It's impossible to have that much risk. And so it was a determination of, like, our most likely event is going to be X amount for a payout. We're going to insure for that. Everything else we'll have to deal with. I mean, if we had an event type of situation, where's the likelihood? Are we going to get hit with a target-sized mega breach and we're going to end up paying $110 million? No. So,
Your coverage and limits and all that stay the same?
Yes. Yeah. Fred. I love the question. How much risk reduction did you actually get by doing this versus doing it just to make the insurer happy? There were some things that did not impact, I think, risk overall, like some of the web headers and those various things. Our internal controls, I think, I can tell you that because we actually measured that internally. That brought our risk posture down probably 10% or more. Because it was better alerting, more timely alerting, better accuracy on like the backups. What percentages were we at, and now where are we better now that we focused that on those types of things? So the external stuff, honestly, was just making the insurers happy. It was the internal stuff where we saw the real risk return, which we measured against, from like a contingent liability perspective. I can do a whole thing on that topic too if you want to chat with me later. Not today. The providers themselves, none of them wanted to talk other than the application.
After you got the insurance placed, once you had the policy, did you work with the panel providers that the insurance company normally worked with if there was an incident?
Oh, no, we never engaged. We did our own tabletops internally, though. Yes, Fred? That was about break even. Yeah. Great question, though. Huh? It paid for itself. Yeah, absolutely. And we got a ton more visibility into the environment by adding the different tools and responses. The MDR and the EDR is the biggest benefit that we got out of that is that our staff wasn't working on it. It was someone else that we were paying to work on it. So we got those returns as well, although a soft cost because it was already included in that. All right. Thanks a lot.
All right, so now we're heading into our last scheduled break. So this will be 15 minutes. We'll reconvene here at 3:25 to go into our last panel, which is cyber resilience at the board level. So go ahead and take a little walk and come back here at 3:25. Thank you.
Yes, tell them we just finished and they missed an awesome panel.
Tell them they missed the tell them the happy hour is in here.
Do you need to kick us off, or? Oh, okay. Yeah, right, okay. All right, well, why don't we get started? Good afternoon, everyone. You know, thank goodness we're doing this in the morning. It would be really unfortunate if at the end of the day, people have heard many talks and they're already kind of checked. Oh, wait, no, that's, okay, all right. So, cybersecurity at the board level, that's the topic here. Thank you for everyone for joining us. We'll start with a few introductions. So I'm Sean O'Kelly. I'm the CEO for a company called Meetings and Events International. We are a healthcare marketing company, but I'm a technologist at heart, been a technologist for most of my career. So that's a little bit about me. Why don't we just go down the line and have everyone introduce themselves.
Sure. Hey, I'm Daniel Meyer. I'm the Chief Information Security Officer for Morningstar. I started my career with a little detour through physics, kind of like Walter. We always have that in common. And apparently one more person. And I made it back to security after that. Worked in offensive security, pen testing for NCC Group for a while, and I'm now with Morningstar for about 3 years.
Nice. Robert Wagner, I'm a field CISO. Also started off my career as, my first job in InfoSec was a third shift SOC analyst. So I've seen a lot. I'm also co-founder of a charity called Hack for Kids. We teach kids about internet safety, security, and ethics. Thanks all. And I'm also on the board of the ISSA Chicago chapter here.
Hello, everyone. I'm Dan Manley. I'm the CISO at CME Group. I did not start my career in physics, but I really like Big Bang Theory. Along my career, started out in the U.S. Air Force and spent many years in consulting with a heavy focus in financial services.
My name is Richard Russian. I'm CISO for Motorola Mobility. Have been the CISO now going on 16 years, so I've been around forever. I've done multitudes of several different startups, as well as worked for large, massive global corporations around the world.
All right. Great group, a very qualified group for sure, no question. So cyber resiliency at the board level, part of what we hope to convey today is when, as complicated topics have to be communicated to other folks on the board, how do we do that? And how do we stress what's really important? How do we emphasize what's important now versus what might be important later? And what, so when you're communicating with a finance leader, a sales leader, an operations leader, a CEO, and you're a CIO or CISO, how do you do that in a way that's effective? And so part of what we hope to weave into the conversation is that theme, and that's kind of what the point of how you communicate to the board is. So a lot of folks on board, at the board level, if for anyone that has interacted with boards, most folks are finance people, and then you have other leaders with other backgrounds sprinkled in, but a lot of folks are finance people. So how they're looking at P&Ls, they're looking at balance sheets, they're looking at cash flow statements. How do you take that and craft messages that resonate with that group? So, but why don't we start just very fundamentally, what is cyber resiliency? So who'd like to start us off with that question? Let's start there.
I'll jump in. I think Walter in his presentation earlier today did a good job of helping to describe cyber resiliency. When I talk to executives, trying to make sure they understand that cyber resiliency is that focus around availability, reliability, and recoverability in the context of the security threats that the organization faces. You quickly get into a discussion of, well, isn't that DR and business continuity? You have to draw a distinction between operational resiliency. How do we keep the organization up, servicing our customers doing that things that make money for us, and cyber resiliency, which is really about what are those threats that are going to target the organization to really have adverse impact. I spend quite a bit of time to help them understand that quite frequently a cyber incident for us is going to manifest itself as an operational incident, helping them understand that it may take us hours or days to conclude that it's really a cyber attack. If, as we get into the worst case scenario, is usually pretty eye-opening for them. There is that misnomer that, well, as soon as it starts, you guys are going to know, right? And then they'll have it fixed like before the end of the day. And so I think helping them to understand how to break it down into its components and be able to differentiate other terms they may hear across the organization is something that's proven helpful.
Yeah, I think it's to use an old quote, you know it when you see it. Resilience is one of the things. We've all experienced it, whether it's Okta outages or breach function, Microsoft's outages or breaches. Any one of those has always fallen into those areas. Even Amazon with their metrics for their billing function took whole cloud instances down. We've seen the resilience impact of now what? And everybody just stares blankly at the screen going, well, what are we going to do? And I think that's part of the issue, is that it is the plan of the unknown scenario as well as the known stuff that you actually have to have. There's not a lot of things that come into play in the resiliency area except for preparation. If you're not prepared, it's going to kill you. It's going to kill the business. It's going to kill the organization. Everyone's going to look on that. So being prepared is really the best part of that. It's been around for a while. World Economic Forum released a bunch of paperworks back in the around 2016 or so when they were talking about it, and they viewed it as this is a way to get people to go into cybersecurity and do it because the resiliency aspect that cybersecurity provides on that side of it. If I'm starting to look at this, I have to figure out if this breaks, what happens next. And I think that's part of the issues, is understanding all those potential points. And we did this when we had our exercise during the pandemic. It was like, now VPN access, which didn't used to be business critical, wasn't a resiliency factor. Now with everybody working from home, I took your 7 VPN concentrators around the world down, only 7 IP addresses that I needed to take offline. Does your business still work, or what you're left with? Oh, go into the office. Oh, we can't do that, it's closed. Now what? And those are kind of the next steps, that the 5 whys, the other side of it, that you really have to dig into as part of these resiliencies, because there's a ton of unintended consequences, but also the simple fact is you got to be prepared for all these things that come at you, whether it's third party, your internal side, attacker, nation state. Pick your choice of what you're supposed to do. Also look at your other issues, because you may have perfect cyber resiliency, but your third party that's doing shipping does not. So guess what? You're in the same bucket that you were before.
So let's talk. Nope, go ahead, Daniel.
Yeah, that's one quick note. I think one thing is also that you have to, like, I guess that where you were getting at, you have to assume that something happens, right? That you have to plan for those events. But I think the other factor is, I hate to use this word again because everybody hates it, zero trust, right? You probably need to make sure that if something happens, it's contained. And so I think part of resilience is also that if you have an incident like ransomware or something like that, it doesn't affect the entire organization, but that you try to compartmentalize if possible so that you limit the impact and then can focus recovery on those parts of the business.
So let's talk about let's double click on this a little bit. Let's talk about the tools and mechanisms for how we, I mean, so you talk about risks and threats. How is that measured? How are those things identified? How are they cataloged? How are they communicated? Because that's really a big part of cyber resiliency, is in order to be prepared, that means that you have to have done the work on the front end to have the tools and the funding in place, and the processes and the policies in place to ensure that the right steps are being followed along the way, and then if something does happen, that the team knows how to react. So let's talk about how do you do that? How do you identify, catalog, communicate, the cyber threats?
Well, so I'd say first off, we suck at doing this, right? For a long time, we've been trying to do it like on the matrices, right?
Classic matrix, right?
Yep, and who here has heard Doug Hubbard speak about this? Yeah, right? And one of the great things he points out is there's been several studies that show that using matrices to measure risk is often worse than doing nothing. Yeah, right? And it's just ridiculous. So what he and some other people, even Ed, who was up here previously as a speaker, Richard Rushing also, a lot of people, Doug Rush here, they're all trying to apply in some ways either probability or actuarial math to measure risk, which is such a good direction to take because now we're talking in terms that the board understands, right? That's the kind of risk that they actually can connect with and digest.
Because if you're using probabilities, you're able to then kind of start to attach dollars to those probabilities, right?
Precisely,
Yeah,
yep.
right, yep.
There needs to be the secret decoder ring for executive level talk, which is usually dollar signs in most of the cases that's there.
And that's how you get, this is how you get to the, this is how you get to the finance leader, right?
Yeah.
Right here.
So, and I think that's one of the sides of it. And again, it's like the matrices, I'm sorry, everything's always red. And if you're in a world where you have green or yellow, look closer, it'll be red. Or someone's lying to you on some numbers. It's that struggle, and you bring up, there I wouldn't say a wealth of tools, but it's back to the same thing. I want to put it back to connect the dots, because we brought up and we kind of glossed over like DR and business continuity. If you don't have that already outlined for a system you're trying to protect, well, step one, I can't recover, or I can't isolate, I can't contain if I don't have a backup or even know who's in charge of this. So you really have to have your house in order, but you already have those to say, okay, these are all covered, check. These are all covered, check. And it's back to the same thing. This needs to be things that are not covered, you haven't come to agreement on, need to be in the risk registry so the board can take action and goes, no, we've documented this, because it sucks when, oh, bad things happen and you're like, we documented this, and well, it was in an email to the CFO and he never ever read the document. So now you're in another discussion.
Do you tie it back to contracts too, customer contracts, whether they're SLAs or just missed revenue? Is there some of that too?
Simple things. So resiliency, incident notification, 48 hours to tell me you got a problem. I can tell you every customer that is in the news never tells you that in 48 hours, ever, that's there. But if it's in your contract, when you're renegotiating your contract, you now have some ammunition to use against them, but it's back to the same thing. Don't expect, just because it's written in a piece of paper, that it's going to be applied to that. Even we have indemnification, so yes, you go get breached, okay, liquidated damages, $5 million, because that was what we said was the amount of value of the data that you're storing. Write us a check.
Right.
Okay, you know that's not going to happen for another 4 or 5 years when all the dust settles.
And that's why most people think cyber insurance is about making the organization whole, but oftentimes it's actually about covering the cost of your missed SLAs to your customers, right?
Yeah, it's what's being damaged. So you're going to have to go into those areas, but it's not your wheelhouse. I'm not a finance guy per training or anything else that's there. So you've either needed to partner with people that are around that to do this. This is not just sits in a CISO or a CSO org's wheelhouse. You may be ultimately responsible for it, but it's a team that's made up of the entire organization structure to build that resiliency plan. You can start in an area and then expand out, but it's going to be the same thing. You need IT involvement. You need supply chain. All these different groups need to be brought together to understand what would it take to move a factory in some cases. What would it take when the factory's flattened? How long is it going to take to be back up?
Right.
Is it months? Is it weeks? Is it years? What do I do with material that's in that factory? Because that's value. Now, oh yeah, you can ship it across the country. how and what trucks, and this is billions of dollars of semiconductors and everything else that we're moving in a very strange way. Oh, we're not doing that ever. Then there's a different story to be had with that. But you really need to get the business aligned with the technical side of it, so that you understand what the next moves are.
So going back to the original question, and Dan, you look like you want to jump in. How do we catalog and identify these things, and how do we communicate them in a way that resonates?
So if you just listen to the conversation, you posed the question of how do we communicate that to board?
Right.
And we all talked, you have to have your ducks in a row.
Right.
Right, you have to have facts, you have to understand your business environment, how you're measuring things, the beacon terms and language that are relevant to them. Our board at CME Group is a large board. The head of our risk committee is a gold trader. And so he usually starts his questions with, I read this in the Wall Street Journal, I don't know what it means, are we okay? And all he wants me to say is yes. And you
There's only one right answer.
There's only one right
And
answer.
you never say yes.
Right? And so it's a matter of saying, well, what you need to understand about that article is this. Here are the steps we've taken around it. But I think it's all predicated on the fact of you've got all the pieces and parts across the organization, not just in cyber, and you've got to be able to bring those together into the story that you're able to explain to the members of the board in a way they understand. One other example, we had recently some of the articles around insider threat, right? Had a different board member, and she's like, well, do we monitor for that? And it's like, yes, I have an entire team that does that. I'll bring that presentation next quarter. She's like, seriously? I go, yeah, we do. And it's a factor of our disciplines can be so large, and we're so dependent on potentially other functions, whether it be physical security, depending on where DR and business continuity sit. We work and partner with them, and you need to be able to bring that holistic story in to help the board members understand the risk to the organization and what's being done to resolve it.
One of the coolest exercises I ever went through, I was working in a large financial, and they actually had all the business units come and present to IT and security combined on how the business operates. And what a fantastic thing that was to actually, I mean, how often do folks in our positions not, and certainly the people under us, not know how the business they're defending even works. To have those folks come in and tell them how the business works from their point of view really can help the practitioners then talk in their language.
No, that's great. Daniel, is there any, from your point of view at Morningstar, is there anything in particular that Morningstar is doing to catalog and identify and communicate risk?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with what everybody has been saying around having a catalog and knowing what you have. So we have a system to track that, and we're tying it also how we manage our cloud accounts. So we don't have any physical things like Richard has to deal with. It's mostly software system and data. So what we have our organization structured in different technical services and business services, and we're tracking DR and resilience requirements based on those. And then we're having revenues tied to those, and we're reporting that to the board so that we can see which percentage of our revenue is covered with resilience, or DR in this particular instance. Very rough and high level metric, but sufficient for the board to see the trends and how things are going. I think what we're struggling with still is dependencies, because nothing is working independently, especially if you have a lot of central data like we have. One system depends on another. You have all these connections in the business. And it's really difficult to really disentangle that. And if something's down over here, it might have an impact over here. And that is difficult to communicate.
So let's jump to another part of this topic. So we were talking, Dan, you were mentioning earlier the difference between cyber resilience and operational resilience. Let's talk about how do we make that meaningful at the board level. So how do we educate the board? Some of it's education, right? Some of it is using real life examples and real life materials. So maybe give some examples of how each of you have gone about doing that. What type of example have you actually presented to a board that would be relevant to the group?
I can go ahead.
I'll start. Let no good issue go unfunctioned on that, because you have them. Resiliency is not about the enterprise always being flattened. It could be about a group, an operation, a division, a server. that becomes critical. We've done different things around that and showed things. And I think one of the things that's there is, just as you explained in the organization, what does finance do, and here is everything that they're done, but what does treasury do inside the group? What does accounts payable, accounts receivable? Oh, wow, there's all these groups. Same goes for a PC. It's like you have the networking team that makes the connections with that. They're part of this puzzle. You have the operating system team that deals with the OS that's on the system, making sure that that is patched. You have the application owners that are the application that's running on the server. There's 3 different people that are involved in the health of that system, and each one of those could have a resiliency impact that's based on it. So they need to be part of the conversation that's there and working together, but it's the same thing. And security is one of the things, self-inflicted wounds. We brought these up to cyber resiliency. Be careful what you bring forward, because if you bring forward too good of a case study, you now become the de facto case study that everybody is measured against. So we had a AV tool that we pushed out a new policy, and lo and behold, knocked about 4,000 people offline, 10 o'clock in the morning. All gone. Whoops, okay, let's go fix that. Well, 20 minutes later, everybody's fixed and everything else. But that was a resilience to say that we impacted about 4,000 people in their ability to do their work with that. It was addressed within about 25 minutes till everything was there, but that period of window we brought up, which was good because they wanted to understand how we discovered it, why it happened, where, okay, everything was all laid out on the table. That's good, but they were more impressed that we were able to touch 4,000 machines and bring them back live in 15 minutes through a software config, which is great. Now their thing is it takes 15 minutes to do anything in the world to replace a system. And you're like, no, this is not what you should have learned from this. But it is one of the things that you're there is you've got examples of this. And the more you give a taste to the board or the audit committee or the senior leadership team, they're going to ask questions that they're going to hone you for the next one. And you're going to find out what's really important to them. Like your question, he's going to ask the same question around gold every single time that's there. Why? Because that's what he does. And you're never going to change it.
Have any of you actually, in communicating some of those threats, or trying to educate the board in communicating some of that, have you ever been put on the spot? And
define on the spot
by the board and said, okay, tell us when this is going to be resolved. Tell us how you're going to resolve this and give me a date.
Yes.
Yes, I don't think
So
you ever leave a board meeting without an action item. I don't know. Does anybody have ever left a board meeting without an action item in here?
Well,
no. Okay.
No, that's true. But the idea that you'd be put on the spot for a specific date, how do you handle that scenario? And feel free to jump in. Anyone.
For us, given the state of where cybersecurity has been over the last 5 years, I've been proactive that I go in and tell them, here's the problems, here's the plan to resolve it. As new topics and issues come up, we look at them and say, I don't have that date for you today, you'll have that date by the end of the week, and we'll follow up with board communication.
Okay.
Better that we take it that way than we promise a date that there's no way we can deliver against. Your question of how do we differentiate that for the board, I report to the CIO, but my materials are independent.
Right.
From a security perspective, my boss doesn't even look at my materials. I submit them through the corporate secretary. When we go in to present, he's in the room with me. And the same holds true for our operations representative. So as we get into discussions, we're able to point, and I'll get a question on operational resilience, and I'm able to point and say, that's really a question for this individual, and let them respond to help draw greater delineation across all of our different functions. We also, with our board, have charters for what is cyber versus what is operational resiliency. They review those charters on an annual basis to sign off on them. And then additionally, we do annual training with our board members on on topics that relate to cybersecurity. So we'll go in and talk about how we're doing threat intel, what is an incident, how do we test it, validate it, what are the scenarios we cover, to be able to help give them a broader base of knowledge to help us be more effective when we're communicating metrics or topical items that may come up through the Wall Street Journal, so that they have a base of understanding what our current capabilities are.
Channel your best Scotty and impersonation when you're getting this on that side of it. Give it time. I will say also, when you're asked on a spot like that, always point out that if you would like this, if we feel the need or the risk to do this faster, money and people do help. As that.
You gotta be careful with that.
It is a
Might wanna be careful
landmine
with
that you
that
can step
one,
on that side of it that's there.
You have to read the room,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
Our risk
Right.
committee, the CEO is sitting right there, so I'm not gonna ask for more money unless I've asked him directly.
Or your
Before I do
boss,
that to the rest
your
of the
boss
board,
is in
right?
the room and they're like, give him more money, and he's like, well, thanks for throwing me under the bus at
Right,
this point.
right. People want to know about things in advance. So you don't want to be careful about riffing too much on the fly with the CEO and the board in the room and all that, so. Robert, Daniel, either one of you want to jump in on
I mean,
educating the board and how you interact with the board?
Yeah, I mean, I think the interesting thing is that, so I agree with that, like, I would probably commit to like a timeline to be presented at an earlier date, and then figure out the rest from there. But I think what really helps, so we haven't done a tabletop exercise with our board, but they have recently asked for that, which I find great, because we had really good success doing that with the executive team and all the other stakeholders, from sales to product owners to communications, legal, everybody being there. And when you do that and have them actually think through it, they understand more like what is actually asked of them, what are the actual things that are happening, and they're also, we will educate them on the vocabulary ahead of time, so that they know if they hear about a cyber incident, what are the words you might hear, what is the decision they might be asked to do, and playing through that scenario, I think is a really good way of like getting them to think about it. One of our board members, she's on another board, and she's the cybersecurity expert on that board, which we are benefiting from.
I was just going to ask that. Do any of your boards have technical leaders, or is it mostly finance, operations, and sales leaders? 'Cause that's good if they have technical
we do
leaders.
have people who are from technical backgrounds,
Good.
but we don't designate experts on our board.
Okay.
It's not something we do in any of the subject matter areas.
Okay.
And I'd have to agree that tabletop exercises are one of the better ways to do this, especially when you see the board run into, I don't know the answer to that question, right? Making them think through that does so much to change the discussion.
No, and like I said, it's one of the things that things can appear as something else and then translate into cyber. So as it's nice and balmy, 80 degrees outside and bright sun is shining, everybody remembers anybody that had a data center in London last year during the summer heat waves. Okay, is that a physical security incident? Is that a cyber incident where we're having to shut down a whole entire data center because we're not going to get power and it's going to brown out? Wow, I got no one to blame for that, except, well, we put too much density or they put too much density. And so you're in a hard situation that some of these things are not necessarily your responsibility, but it translates back into that. So you're going to be the tag leader in most of the cases that it is involving computer equipment in one way, shape, or form. It's going to be part of that. If you're doing people, you can escape that one typically. But there's some of these that are, hey, if it's an application, it's this, okay, you're in the middle of this. So you're either taking a leadership role or you're the target focal point on that's there. So even if it's not what you're trying to do, you're going to be asked to either lead, just like an incident response process that's there, you're going to be the one that's going to be tasked with leading this. And that sometimes is, I didn't do this, it's not my mess to clean up, and you're stuck. Because somebody asked you either from senior leadership or they figured that you were the person that knew most about it.
All right.
They'll give it to you.
Well, let's do one more question, then we want to leave 5 minutes for a little bit of Q&A. So last question, whoever wants to jump in, and we'll get point of view from everybody. Just tell us something new, creative that you're doing today that you can share with the group. If you can't share them, that's a different thing. But
So one thing that I've been seeing, just starting to rise amongst various security practitioners, is the whole concept of using chaos engineering for security. So it's well established for the IT part of the world, especially for cloud environments. The introduction of security chaos engineering is really cool, and I think a really better way to test that resiliency than sort of the disaster recovery business resiliency that we've done in the past. So I'd like to see more along this line, but, and for those of you that don't, are familiar with chaos engineering, so Netflix was a big proponent of it, and literally they just break shit, and then you'd have to deal with it, right? You'd bring down a whole AWS zone, and the company had to recover from it. The same thing happens in chaos engineering for security, but instead we're injecting faults. Risk-driven fault injection is a concept that you can Google to get more on it, but there are automated tools now to inject the faults and then test for those faults to help improve your resiliency. I love this idea.
That's great. 30 seconds to 1 minute. Everyone else, tell us something new.
I mean, for me, it's really about the reporting and tying technology and business together, and getting that mapping done between which technology supports which part of the business and getting the ownership right, and then you can have much better accountability for resilience and and to determine impacts in case something happens to that particular piece of technology. And we're working through that process of establishing those maps, and we have buy-in from finance and other departments, so that's really like a cross-functional initiative, which is fun.
So we have a really large board. We have a lot of regulatory requirements. So what we've actually done is created what I refer to as a storyboard. So there's a standardized set of topics that are going into each quarterly meeting. And we actually presented that to the board and said, at a minimum, we're going to bring this to you. Are there other things you're interested in? So we can get kind of some voice of the customer back and say, I'd really be interested in this topic. And so we start with that storyboard, and we figured out what can go in appendix versus what we want to spend time on. But then we can supplement that with topical items that may be coming up over time. And it's really helped the risk committee and the broader board understand the things that we're really dealing with, from what's our strategy, what's the size of the team, financials, all the way through when are we actually doing our third-party tests, when are they going to see the results. We can lay that out for them so they know what to expect.
And there's obviously a lot, that's great, there's obviously a lot of information out there about the power of storytelling, right?
Yeah.
So that is a good way, a very good way to communicate.
No, I second the storytelling. If you can't drive a story, it may be Mother Goose, Jack and the Beanstalk, or the latest, greatest Tom Clancy spy novel that you're going to tell a story about, but it needs to be a story. I think one of the things that it was mentioned on there, I think is really important that we started that as part of this cyber resiliency journey, is doing tabletops with all the different groups to go in and not managed by anybody else, just asking the questions. Tell us what will stop your side of the business from working on that. And it's really fascinating because you'll find out this server under someone's desk over here will shut down the legal department if you do not, if it ever turns off or anything else. Or no one is getting paid anywhere in the world if this goes down. You need to find where those exist. And sometimes those are, everybody knows about it, and sometimes the people know about it and are not really vocal to tell because they're like, we're trying to get rid of this, but we still haven't either got funding or it's too hazardous to move kind of scenarios with that. I think doing those tabletops gets you a bunch of different pieces of data that you can all merge together.
That's
and get
great.
a much better story around the enterprise cyber resiliency instead of just what my view on the cyber resiliency is going to be.
That's great. A lot of great examples and information. Thank you, everybody. So we've got just a couple minutes now. I think we want to do take
some Q&A.
Take a couple questions.
Thank you. So I know right now a lot of boards are quite concerned about the economy, and they're putting a lot of pressure and scrutiny on the C-suite to scale back investments. And traditionally, cybersecurity is something that you don't scale back. I'm just curious, are your boards placing like a similar level of scrutiny, and are you feeling any pressure to scale back any investments on your top cybersecurity programs, or do you still feel like you're getting the investment that you would like?
I have not, I think the direction is to spend money wisely, but we have not had any cuts or any scale backs.
Yeah, I think from spending, your investments are not nearly as much as they were pre-COVID and during COVID side of it that's there. But again, it's back to the same thing. Is this a 2-quarter issue? This is going to be a multi-year issue? That's the board's having that version of it that's actually there. But I think it's going to happen, right or wrong. If your business, and I've tagged things to revenue before for budget and everything else, and it sucks when the revenue declines because guess what? You signed up for this. Guess what? Your budget's going to get hit just like everybody else's because you signed up to say, hey, if we grow, I want to grow fast. And, okay, but that's the risk of doing that. So I think it's one of the things, I don't think you're gonna see that much first couple of quarters, but if this continues on further past that, you're gonna see substantial, de-investment into a lot of organizations that are like, can you stretch this out, move it to next year kind of scenario with that, just to do things. It depends on the industry. I make 3% off of every product I make. That's not a huge thing. So that impacts us dramatically in a lot of cases on that side.
Pressure, yes, not from the board, from finance, right there, to your point of, they're trying to get.
When
ahead
have they
of it.
not twisted your arm?
Right, we discussed in preparing, discussion with the CFO, he thinks I've gold-plated everything, right, but, we're having trade-offs.
Probably not wrong. He's probably not wrong.
Well,
It's
so-
silver, it's silver, I tell you.
I'm gonna take Richard's comment, not to let a good crisis go to waste, which is, they came and they said, hey, can you reduce your pro fees? Sure, if you let me go hire this number of people in this location, I'll give you 80% of that pro fee back. Or if I give this back to you now, that's fine, but if we see these factors unfold through our metrics, I don't care whether I have the budget or not, I'm gonna go hire those consultants to come in and help supplement the staff. And they understand those trade-offs, and we document those risks as we go through it. We have to, security in the past, we had very open checkbook, right? We're much more now trying to fall in line with the other parts of technology to make sure we're being good corporate citizens and how we spend our resources.
I know we're at time. Do we want to take one more question?
Okay, so this is more of a people question. So as you prepare to present to the board, what is the process of, or do you take time to get to know the board members to anticipate the questions they may ask? So do you basically prepare to kind of like get to know them by, if you don't know them already, like go onto their LinkedIn profile to kind of get a glimpse of where they're coming from and any questions that you can anticipate, right, before you meet with the board? How do you prepare to get to know them? That's the question. So
Yeah,
that's more of a people question.
I can share, right, we use all sources available to learn, and that may be reaching out through my professional network to understand some of the new board members. But then additionally, when we have we have a risk committee, which is the designated committee of our board for cyber. Anybody new that gets assigned to that committee, we have an orientation with them. And we go sit down for an hour and a half and walk them through our program, and we get a dialogue and a rapport going. We walk them through that storyboard to help them understand and have a base of knowledge. It affords us the opportunity just for me to give them my number to say, if you have a problem or a question, you can call me directly. But it just helps make it a lot easier when we get in those structured settings to present, that we're not just getting the, I don't understand any of this. What are you talking about? So we make an investment up front to educate them outside of that broader meeting, just so things go smoother.
I think it's a good, stock them. No, not really. But I think it's one of the things.
It's a
you
fine
do-
line.
Yeah,
Threat
it's a fine
intel,
line. It's a fine line
stalking.
on that.
I
When you
had my threat intelligence team do a whole dossier on
yeah, when you show up to their thing and your tea time is 15 minutes before their tea time, that becomes a little questionable on that side of it that's there. But no, I think it's really important, and it's not just for boards, it's for audit committee, SLT, and everything else. And most of the time, if you're coming in for the first time, you have a mentor or somebody that can do that. You can ask for the introductions or ask them to, is it okay if you introduce yourself to them and ask them if you have questions? Because you'll find that some of them love to talk about cybersecurity. Some of them were like, that's technical stuff and don't talk to me ever about this again because it's scary and I don't want to know about it. So I have a person on my board that was part of the PlayStation data breach and lived through that. So you want to go present on a breach and they're like, oh, if you think this is bad, let me give you, and you're like, gosh, not you. But those are things that we'll run into that you have no idea what their experience is or what other boards they're members of that come back. But offering your expertise to them and asking if there's any questions, you can do a deep dive or some of the other stuff, is a good olive branch to hand off to folks to say, hey, I'm not here to scare you or pull the wool over your eyes or try to get you to spend money. I'm here to make the company a safer place. Tell me your thoughts on that side of it that's there. And they'll provide good feedback in a lot of cases, but you'll know who are your strong and weak points, and then Some people are focused on privacy, some people are focused on data sovereignty. In our board, we have a bunch of people, and it's language barriers in some cases that are there. So you have to be cognizant of that. I may not ever reach all the board members because I have to have an interpreter that's talking between me, and that's kind of an awkward situation.
There are times you need to be a bit assertive, like some of the audit committee members only want to talk to finance or internal audit, and those folks aren't always equipped to be able to give the full story. So there's been scenarios where I've had to track down the audit chair and say, I understand you had a question, what can I answer for you?
If you do an audit, make it a lunch at a really expensive restaurant over the per diem amount and make them pay.
But I think the informal setting definitely is helpful. Like our board is fairly informal, which is very, very nice. And I've been invited to board dinners and other things, and getting people to know on a more personal level in that environment is really helpful because you can learn about their backgrounds and what their perspectives are. And they might also ask you more candid questions than they would ask in the boardroom on record. So that's been really helpful. So I think it's important to get to know them at least somewhat on a personal level.
All right, I think we are definitely slightly over time, so thank you, everyone. Thank you to the panel.
All right, so moving on to our last keynote speaker, I would like to invite Greg Friedman up to the podium to introduce our last speaker. He'll be here momentarily.
Thank you very much. First of all, I'd like to thank both the Kent School of Law and IIT, Illinois Institute of Technology, for hosting this wonderful event. And on behalf of both Splunk and ISSA, wonderful to be here, and thank you, everybody. We have a distinguished speaker today, and I could probably spend more time than he's going to be speaking just in his introduction. Calvin Nobles is currently the department chair and associate professor here at IIT, but of their School of College Computing, but has an illustrious background, going back to the military in the Navy, but specifically Cyber Command for U.S. Naval and Fleet Command. Pretty amazing. He's probably happy he's not doing it now with all the international threats that are happening, and probably the people that are doing that are under a lot more stress. Also commercial experience with Wells Fargo and other organizations, but as I said, currently with IIT, and we're very, very thankful to have him here. In addition to what I just mentioned, he also has at least 3 PhDs. Do you have any others that I don't know of? Okay, 3 PhDs, which makes me feel not as smart as I thought I was. So with no further ado, I'd like to invite Dr. Nobles to join us today for the keynote presentation.
Good evening. I promise I won't be long, and I promise I won't turn this into a lecture. So this presentation really is about getting you all to think about something differently and to think about the human element in cybersecurity, because it's an area where we really struggle, and it's an area where we haven't embraced it, and it's an area where it's really problematic for a lot of us. And so for the CISOs out there, the CIOs, the CTOs, CSOs, I don't want to be one of these smart guys that come to the table. I get it. You got a Thanksgiving-sized plate in front of you every day, and I'm not trying to put 2 more turkey legs on it. But I'm trying to help you get turkey legs off your plate. And so I say that very facetiously, but I'm really serious about it. Really, we have to start thinking differently about the human element in cybersecurity. And so with that, I would just like to say that this is not going to be a lecture. I do like lecturing, but this is not the place. This is a hard presentation to give because it really can be very boring sometimes. And so I put some comical stuff in there to make it comical, but I don't want to give a typical academic lecture where we look at statistics and all that. That's not fun. No, that's not fun at all. So with that, we'll go ahead and we'll get started. Oh, going the wrong way. Uh-oh. Now I got it. So I love giving my presentation with a famous quote. Everybody know who this individual is, and this is why, you know, I love saying it. It's because we do spend a lot of money on everything, but we struggle with really investing in one of the weakest links in our security chain, and that's people. A lot of people get upset that I say that, but let me give you some data. 80 to 95% of all security breaches are due to what? It's due to what? Human error. Let me ask you another question. How many of you classify your human errors? As a science. Human error is a science. Rule-based, knowledge-based, skill-based, or violations of policy. Been out there in existence since the 1980s. That's why I'm saying in cybersecurity, we don't go far enough with really understanding our human errors. And this is why this slide is so important. And so at the end of the day, what I want us to walk away with is, who really needs human factors engineering? How many of you ever heard of human factors engineering? How many of you know it's a scientific discipline? It is. It's been around for 80 years. But here's our struggle. When we say human factors, it's an ugly battle, because what are we saying? We're saying, is it the human factor, or are we saying human factors, right? As you can see, a distinct difference. One is about the behavior and the things we do within our operating system and with our information systems, with our information technology, and within the programs we operate. For instance, like this, my password, storing it in the disk, right? But really what we really want to focus on is the slide over here that's the human factors, to really explore the way we work, to explore why errors occur, and to also design better ways. So, who is missing from the table? Look, I want you all to think about all your teams. Let me ask a series of questions. When you have a network problem, who do you call? When you have a software problem, who do you call? When you have a computing issue, who do you call? How about that? Now let me ask you this. When you have a human factors problem, who do you call? Exactly. That's the best answer we're going to get. So let me give you a little joke. So one day I was meeting with a global CISO, and we was talking about human factor engineering as a discipline, not the human factor that we so-called know it. That gets us in a lot of trouble. But it exists. We need to have an appreciation for human factors as we know it, but we also need to gain an appreciation for human factors as an engineering discipline in cybersecurity, right? And so I was meeting with this global CISO, and she said, what are you researching? I said, I'm researching human performance issues in cybersecurity. She said, you don't need to research that. You can just call HR. And I dropped my head. And I said, so you want me to call HR to address a problem that you created by building a complex cyber ecosystem that's causing you to burn out, that's causing your employees to be distracted, that's causing high levels of stress, and that's lack prioritization? How's HR going to help you with that? And she said, well, I'm confused. I said, that's why I'm here. But I really was there to help her. And now she understands that when we have to open our aperture when we're talking about the human element in cybersecurity, we have to look at it differently. Man, so here we go. When we look at engineering disciplines in cybersecurity, they're there. And this is not all of them. This is just some I put up there. There's a lot more. But guess the one that's missing the most? See that little one over there? Now let me ask you a question. Everybody should get it right. Which one been around the longest? Human factors engineering has been around since World War II. Born out of military aviation because we was crashing planes every day. And so it was born out of experimental psychology. And it's been around forever. And the beauty of it is, the things that we're experiencing with the human element in cybersecurity isn't new. The medical community addressed it. Remember we had patients going in, supposed to get a left leg removed, and they get a right leg and a right arm removed. We had a patient that was going in to have a lung removed. They come out with everything else removed. So the medical community really had to address this, and they did through human factors. They really did. Aviation. Now, minus the couple of the incidents we had in the last 4 or 6 weeks, but aviation got it right. They got it right when it comes to understanding people and technology and processes. You see the correlation between cybersecurity? We have a lot in common with aviation, more so than most of us will agree with, but it's there. And the reason I like to show this slide is because we have to start thinking differently about human factors engineering. Most of you, let me ask, how many of you got a human factors engineer on your team? Why not? Then let me ask you this. Who's solving your people problem? Right. And so that's why the issues we have, the answer he gave is what everybody else always gives, HR. So you're wondering why we have issues in cybersecurity that are sustained, like 80 to 95% of all data breaches caused by human error. That's not new. That's been sustained for over 10 years. Normally when I give this presentation, I give it under the title, Let's Stop Admiring the Problem. But today I want to do a little thing different. I want us to really start resonating, how can human factors engineering really help you? Now I'm going to tell you one of the problems is, academic has failed you. We don't teach human factors engineering in cybersecurity or IT or any tech courses. The closest we get is human-computer interaction and computer science. Human-computer interaction only teaches you with the digital interfaces, right? It don't teach you the full immersion of understanding human factors in cybersecurity. And now what's going on, human factors also gave birth to HCI. HCI is giving birth to usable privacy and security now. These things are beginning to morph, and they're morphing in the wrong direction because they are all now scaled down versions of what human factors engineering should really be about, right? So this is why academia has failure. I just did some research about 2 months ago, and you know, a lot of schools say we are NSA accredited cybersecurity defense programs, right? Anybody want to guess how many undergrad schools teach human factors in cybersecurity? Well, just one course. Anybody want to guess? 14. 14 out of 303. Now, that's just the title. But when I start looking at the courses are not really teaching these things. Graduate schools. There's 147 graduate programs in the country that are NSA accredited. Only 8 teach this course. I teach 2 of them. I teach it at Arizona State, and I teach it at Illinois Tech. Total immersion courses in human factors engineering and cybersecurity. These are some of the subjects that I teach in this course. As you can see, how many of us ever had a course in cyber psychology? Cyber psychology is new, it's been around 10 years. Cyber psychology is how we interact with digitized equipment and online. It's the persona we take, right? How does that technology influence our behavior? Because some people get online and they become whoever they want to be. I love The Rock. I can get on the line and be Rock Johnson whenever I want to. But as you can see, I'm not The Rock, I'm far from it. But that's what some people do when they get online. They take on ulterior motives and alter egos, right? The other thing we really take a look at, really, is like cybersecurity awareness. I'm going to pick on you all for a little while about your cybersecurity awareness program. Everybody in your organization don't eat mayonnaise. Don't ever forget that. But your cybersecurity program is a mayonnaise-based program. You know what that means? You slap it on the sandwich and you feed it to them. Everybody doesn't learn the same way. If I had the opportunity to learn, I'm a hands-on type guy. Put me in a room and give me hands-on, and we'll get there all day. When you put me in a room and I got to listen to a professor, it ain't going to happen. That's me taking my own medicine, right? And so that's why my classes are very interactive, because I don't like the students having to listen to me for long periods of time. But the point I'm trying to make here is that you have to look at how people learn, right? And we need to move away from cybersecurity awareness to cybersecurity competency, right? To where we enforcing people and we helping people better and become better aware at cybersecurity. Awareness is a temporary word to me. How many of you give your cybersecurity awareness program or your lessons once a year, twice a year, 3 times a year. I think cybersecurity awareness should be reinforced at a minimum 5 or 6 times a year. You know why? Because when you reinforce learning, it becomes habit. And here's the other thing. As cyber threat actors change their threat behavior and change their tactics and procedures, some companies wait. If your training occurs in January, you might not get new training until the following January. That is way too long for your employees not to be aware of a new tactic that cyber threat actors are using, right? So it has to be reinforced. When I was in the Navy, I had a job, one of the greatest jobs I had in the Navy was being a shooter. Anybody know what a shooter is? It's the coolest job in the Navy. It's the guys that launch the planes off the aircraft carrier. It's like playing with a giant slingshot at 30 years old. But it's really more serious than that. But that's what it really feels like. But anyway, I used to hate the fact that we did fire drill training every week in the middle of the night sometimes. I hated it. Cold, wet, hot. But let me tell you something. When there was a fire, everybody knew what to do. It was controlled chaos. It was a beautiful thing. Because the training was reinforced, it was second nature. Does that make sense? Cybersecurity, we have to get there. And I know there's a cost point tied to this. I'm not saying that in blindness. I get it. Because every time you do training, somebody's in the back saying, we got 30,000 employees, and it's a 1-hour training, right? You always got that smart guy, probably some accountant or some dude who don't want to do the training in the background saying that, right? But 30 hours of training is worth a major data breach. It's worth it, isn't it? So one of the other things we talk about here is human-centered security. I hear this word a lot in cybersecurity, and as soon as I read it in cybersecurity, I go look to see what it means. People don't define it. We have to stop using words that's not defined. What is human-centered anyway, right? It's nothing more than an approach where we put people at the center and then we design and build around them. How do we design and build today? What do we build around? Technology. You're exactly right. We are very technologically focused. To some degree, that's right, because technology has given us an advantage. But the problem is when you don't train your personnel in parallel with your advancement of technology, you get a lack of trust. Or what you get an over-reliance on technology. And again, we've seen this before. I want you all to get out of your little boxes and start looking at other domains that dealing with people issues and human errors and mistakes. In 2013, when I wrote my first dissertation, I waited 6 months for the FAA to put out a report on pilot training. And you know what it said? Pilots could no longer fly the aircraft with a high level of standard of basic airmanship skills because they have become used to flying with automation. Now, turn that around and look at your team. Do you see the same? Are you thinking the same now? That your team now is so highly redundant on automation that they might be forgetting the fundamentals, right? Just something to think about. Human limitations. Your personnel have limitations. It's been in literature for a while that a software engineer should not program no more than how many hours a day? 4. You wonder why we have so many errors? You think they're exceeding that? Computing is really cognitively high cognitive demand, right? The more highly cognitive things you are doing, the less time you're going to be able to do it at a very high level. The only people that sustain high level of cognitive abilities because they've been trained to do so, special forces. They do it with ease. But look at the training they go through though, right? They induce them in that level of training and get in those certain conditions, and they give them high-level tasks to do, right? And so most of us don't go through that at all. And so this is why it's important to understand human limitations. In cybersecurity, we have built these very complex ecosystems. Let me ask you this question. How many of you can quantify and qualify the complexity of your ecosystem right now? If I say put it on the scale of 0 to 10, with 10 being the hardest, how many of you can do it? And be factual about it. Something we ain't even thought about, right? How many of you have a user experience team? How many of you have a user experience team in your organization? They're always looking externally mostly, right? When I was at Wells Fargo, I met with the user experience team. And I said, you all have 250 people. I said, that's a miniature brigade. I said, can I get about 12 of you all? And they said, for what? I said, I want to take that same cybersecurity program. It's really healthy, if it's too difficult, if it's complex, to get the employee experience from cybersecurity. And then we had to get it from multiple dimensions. You have to get it from a tech dimension. You also got to get it from a non-technical employee dimension, right? And so this is why this stuff is so important. And this is why I'm so passionate about it. It's because most people don't enjoy having this conversation. But it's a conversation that we need to have this conversation. Academia, we need to do better. We need more professors who specialize in human factors and psychology teaching in tech. Anything up there you find very interesting? How many of you know that your cybersecurity program is a socio-technical system? How many of you know that? Your system is based on technology and people, right? Anytime one get out of balance with each other, you create a gap. When you got too much technology, you create a social gap. When you got too much focus on people and not enough technology, like small businesses, you create a technology gap. They have to be together. So let me tell you how I teach this class, especially now with ChatGPT. No more writing assignments. No more writing, it's pointless. But really what I try to do is help the student take away some tools that they can add to their repertoire. How many of you ever noticed that when the Equifax CEO went to Congress and testified, he said that an information technologist was the cost of the data breach? How many of you agree with that? You guys passed the class. You get 100 the first day. My students, all their hands go up. Sometimes their feet, toes, and everything else. They believe that the information technologist caused the incident. But see, I teach them human factors analysis and classification system. I know you all have a lot of free time. Look that up tonight when you're sitting around doing nothing. It's an HVAC. It's the same system used to explore aviation mishap accidents. And what it is, it's a layered approach where you start where the error occurred, and then you walk back it up the organization, all the way up to the executive level of the organization. Nobody is left unturned. Nobody. The purpose of this is to prevent it from happening again. Blame is not part of the solution. Blame is not part of it. It's not about blaming, it's about preventing. I teach my students that. And then I have them to write the nano codes for the HVAC, because HVAC is based on nano codes. And then they do it. And they have to apply it to a major security incident. And then they have to brief it for their midterms. I'm gonna tell you, this year, I was one happy freaking professor, I could tell you. They knocked it out of the park. I was so happy, I was like, dude, I don't know what to do. I was just so happy. Typically when I grade midterms, I'm pulling my hair out, truly. But this time around, my students, they did very well. But I teach them this so when they leave school, they can go to industry and they can be able to contribute to you all. How do we investigate human errors and accidents? That needs to be taught. And it needs to be separate from incident response. Why does it need to be separate from incident response? Because incident response is by getting back to normalcy, right? But you still got to find a way to uncover and discover what happened to prevent it from happening again. And remember, it's not about blame. It's not about blame. It can never be about blame. And so we have to get rid of this in cybersecurity. When it comes to human factors in cybersecurity, I see a lot of this. And this hurts us really bad. I remember when I worked at Wells Fargo, and they didn't really know what to do with me because I did some of everything, really. And my boss was like, so I heard you want to be a human factors engineer. I said, sure, why not? He said, well, let me tell you what I know about human factors. And I let him go on for about 30 minutes, and I said, Kurt, you don't know anything about human factors. And that's not to put you down. It's just to show you that you have the Dunning-Kruger effect. See, sometimes we have to listen. And that's what human factors engineers do very well. We listen to people to understand their problem. Our job is to redesign the system, to make it less frictional, to optimize human performance and behavior. That's our job. When you got a problem, a human factors engineer help you solve that problem. A software engineer is not going to fix a burnout problem. A cybersecurity engineer is not going to fix a lack of prioritization problem, right? But a human factors engineer has been trained to do that. That's why we have to start thinking about this differently. And we have to get rid of this. Everywhere I go, people tell me, let me tell you what I know about human factors. And you know what they tell me? And so there's two definitions of human factors, right? I should have explained that earlier. The working definition is where our behavior every day, the things we do. Most of the time, it's going to be associated with somebody doing something negative. Plugging a USB port into a computer, leaving a laptop in the car overnight that gets stolen, putting your password under your desk, sharing your password with other people, shoulder surfing, piggybacking, all those things. We always say the human factor. I don't like when people say human factor because it's too bland. It's not deep enough. What do you mean when you say the human factors? Are you saying human errors, human mistakes, bad behavior? Let's call it that. And then the scientific definition of human factors, that is a scientific discipline aimed at improving the system through system design, where we're removing high friction areas, complexity, right? So we got some CISOs in the room, and here's one of my major concerns with CISOs. They're getting burnt out. That concerns me. They eat that Thanksgiving Day plate every day, and it's killing them. But how many of you have an anti-fatigue program? Right? Exactly. What is it? An anti-fatigue program. You know who has an anti-fatigue program? Doctors. It's not even documented in policy. When they don't feel well or they're tired, you know what they say? Clear my calendar. Reschedule the patients. The liability is too high. But when you got your lead engineer, principal, or architect in there, that person might be going through a divorce. They're there on the job physically, mentally they're gone. There's no out for them. And so this is where we really have to start paying attention to people. Stress factors have so many of your employees checked out, and you don't know it because we don't have any type of anti-fatigue program in place for them at all. We should. When I was an aviator in the Navy, people used to laugh at us because we had a rule. A lot of time it wasn't a good rule, 12 hours, throttle to bottle, bottle to throttle, right? But that rule saved lives. Everything we do in aviation is written in blood. Somebody has paid the price for it. But in cybersecurity, we need to learn from other domains that are very similar to ours, right? For instance, you got employees that work in 12-hour days. You think that's good? No. Cognitively, do you think they at work for 12 hours? No. We got to find a way to implement anti-fatigue program. Stressors in life, medical conditions, divorces, issues with children, aging parents that are not doing well, are all stressors that take away from us cognitively. Most cybersecurity professionals don't have a way to come in a corner and call timeout. Nor do you plan for that person to be in that state so they can call timeout, right? Double-edged sword, right? But this is why human factors in cybersecurity has to come to the forefront. We got to take it off the second row team, the second team, and put it back on the first team where it belongs. Here's some things I was talking about. None of us would have probably ever thought about human performance issues in cybersecurity, right? HR can't fix this for you. There's another list called the Dirty Dozen. It was determined by some aviation researchers. I know you all have plenty of time. So when you're home tonight, sitting around watching your favorite news show, look up the Dirty Dozen and tell me if every last one of them doesn't apply to apply to cybersecurity. Every last one of them. Their attitudes and behaviors that pretty much degrade your overall cybersecurity mission. The true enormity of this is we don't really understand what we don't know about human factors in cybersecurity. You don't have the right person at the table. Remember, as much as we love our cybersecurity professionals, they can't fix your human problems. And one of the things I've been seeing lately is, I'm not going to call the vendor out, they've been talking about managing human risk. That's the worst thing ever. And I tell you why. All risk in cyber is what? It's human risk. All risk in every organization is what? It's human risk. We created it, right? And so that's why I'm saying little catchy titles get us in trouble, because they keep us from really understanding the true enormity of what we're dealing with. This is where we are, folks. Our approach to human factors and cybersecurity is way too narrow. We got the iceberg waiting on us. And it's going to get worse with artificial intelligence. It's going to get worse with all the advanced technology that we put in place. And the only way to fix this is for people like me and you and the government to partner together to fix this. I was on the phone till like 1 o'clock last night with a researcher over in the UK. A company asked her to solve their human factors problem. But they had already gave her a list of things to do. They had already solved the problem. Not even close. Not even close. And I told her, I said, I think you should walk away from this. I wouldn't even touch this. I've been doing human factors for decades, and I wouldn't even touch this. This is a problem. But you know what the biggest problem was? It wasn't that they were not trying. It was that they did not know how to classify human factors engineering. They thought it was something like people behavior. Human factors engineering is a scientific discipline. Look it up. Been around for 80 years, I promise you. And we need it in cybersecurity. Hopefully I convince you today that we don't have all the people at the table, and that we need to make some changes, and we need to start looking at things differently. And the next time you have a people problem, don't call HR. They could give two shits about your people problem. What you need to say is, how do I bring in the right person to solve this problem, right? Who can I really bring in to solve this problem? And it's a hard problem to solve because human factors engineers are not sitting on the sideline waiting to play. They're already playing somewhere. So you're going to have to go get them, and you have to convince them, because there's not that many of us. Any questions?
Yep.
Operational tempo mean like pace. Like pace. You know, like for instance, when I go to work, I work at the school now. We got 3 major projects going on. How many of you think I'm doing any of those 3 projects well? Probably not. Probably not. I'm barely hanging on. I'm hanging on the back end of the aircraft while it's flying. Does that make sense, sir? So tempo really is about how do you help control tempo? You control tempo through prioritization. That's the human factors answer. You control it by...
To me, it's workload.
It can be workload. It can be workload. Tempo is a military word, right? So I need to fix that. Thank you. I'll put workload up there.
So how do we keep the digital mindset from invading the rest of our life and making everyone think digitally rather than with regard to the human factors? Take, for instance, I'm a marketer by profession and education, and I remember, you know, when I got into marketing, even though it was always a bastardized field because you don't need a license or a specific technology to run it, there were factors that were being, or I should have said there were parts that were being taught, like human behavior, research, secondary and primary, and things of that nature that, you know, that really took advantage, took the human equation into account when you're doing planning, strategic planning and tactical planning. So nowadays, though, it has become nothing but technology. A director of market, a CMO, all they need to know is email and what do you call it, social media and stuff like that, marketing automation, and there is no strategic planning and all that, and no human factors at all in the equation, just as is the case with IT. So the question is, my question is what you're doing and you're evangelizing the beginning of how we make the world understand that we have to take human factors into the equation to keep things from being nothing but, us becoming robots?
Right, and that's a really good question. So the reason I went back to this slide is because earlier I talked about human-centered cybersecurity, right? How do we design cybersecurity programs with humans at the center? Well, first of all, you got to kick technology out of the center right now and place people at the center and build around it. But you're exactly right. We are more focused on technology than we are people right now. The problem is with technology, the research already is telling us this, is that you can implement all the technology in the world. You will not optimize it or get optimal use out of it until you place people at the center. Because when people don't understand the technology, they don't use it. In fact, a lot of them put your organization at higher risk because they circumvent it, because you have built complicated systems, right? And so that's why this is so important. But you're exactly right. So when we talk about designing things, building things, you got to bring the human factors engineers in the room early to be a part of the planning. And they will let you know, hey, what you got going on right here, I see some problems with it, right? And they will help you work through those friction areas so that you can have a more smooth landing rather than having high friction areas and what we call after effects. That's when you implement something and then you determine that you got bad adverse effects afterwards. That's what we're trying to avoid. I'm going to tell you, I've done this talk for 5 years, and I stopped. I stopped because I thought people got tired of hearing it. Yeah.
Dr. Nobles, thank you very much. As was just said, I found this extremely eye-opening and impactful because I always looked at a lot of this as the intersectionality between behavior and psychology. Mm-hmm. And by putting it into the human factor engineering bucket makes a lot more sense. One of the things that I was wondering, and this is just an opinion question on your part, have we advanced too much on technology to surpass the human factor? And what can we do about mitigating it besides just putting the human element into it? But have we kind of gone too far too fast? Because it seems as though, especially if you look at different generations, some can keep up with it, some can't, but I suspect even our young people will get to a point where, I don't like using the term burnout because that's putting the blame on the individual, whereas a lot of times you're not giving them enough resources to do everything. So my question to you is, have we gone too far on technology? And if so, or if not, how can we mitigate it or slow it down a bit so that we can coexist better?
All right, you said a lot there. Well, let me address one part real quick. When it comes to burnout, most people feel fatigued, they feel stressed, they feel tired. They equate that as burnout. When you are burnt out, how long do you think it takes to recover from when you're totally burnt out? It takes 3 to 4 months, totally unplugging from everything and doing nothing. 3 to 4 months. So most people can recover in 2 to 3 weeks. That's not burnout, that's fatigue. All right, but to answer your question, there's a education gap we have in cybersecurity when it comes to human factors. So I think once we start educating people, and I'm working really hard with a lot of colleges and universities to put this in the cybersecurity curriculum, the IT curriculum, and the computer science curriculum, so that we can start teaching students to understand this, so when they get out in the workforce, they already have this knowledge, right? And they can start sharing this knowledge. But I don't think we're too far yet. And the reason I say that is because we can always integrate human factors into the situation, and human factors engineers are trained to help re-engineer current processes. They're not just there to start from the beginning. They will look at a process and say, let's re-engineer this process so it's not so cognitively demanding, or you don't have people who got what we call low cognitive demand working high cognitive tasks, right? And that's something else we don't do in cybersecurity. How do you look at your task and say, do I got the right person doing the right job? That leads to symptoms of burnout because people feel like they got a mismatch in their talent and their jobs, but it don't really lead to burnout. And so burnout is a whole nother conversation we can have. But did I answer your question?
No, the question, yes, but the latter part was, have we gone too far with technological advancement that we've surpassed the ability for people to keep up to it, or are we getting very close to that?
I think it's always bad when you have technology advancement and don't have the people part worked out. But I don't think we have gotten. I don't think we reached a point to where it's beyond return. We can always stop. That's when, like the. I don't know if we can. That's the problem. It seems like we're just advancing and going at such a rapid pace. At what point will we? So this is when we get into the argument of the social determinism versus technology determinism. What you're talking about is technology determinism leading the way, and we just chasing it. But social determinism said, stop. We're ready to say, let's look at this differently, and let's look at the impacts on society rather than chasing technology. Yes. Yes.
Thank you so much for being here. I loved your presentation. It's so good. I worked for the city of Springfield for 2 more weeks because my boss lost the election, but I built a cybersecurity program, the first one for the city. So we have a corporate side, and then we also have a publicly owned utility that also oversees the water. So we have the ISD side, the corporate side, and then the utility side. I'm trying to get these guys together to hang out outside of the office to build a camaraderie so that they can work together really well in the event of a cyber incident. So a lot of these guys have military backgrounds, but the two sides don't want to talk to each other, and they don't. I'm trying to enforce that they're going to have to cross-train and be able to support each other should there be an event. What advice do you have to bring such groups together?
I find it strange that military people don't want to work together. So I think there's some politics there, and I also think there's some leadership that's not making that happen, because military people will typically gravitate towards each other, especially when they get on the job with each other. And so I find that really strange. But I think the one thing you do from a human factors engineering aspect is bring everybody together and hear what everybody's concerns are. Don't try to solve any problems. Just hear what everybody's concerns are. So a human factors engineer is part psychologist, part engineer, and part counselor. We like to hear everybody's problems because at the end of the day, we're responsible for solving your problems. We can't solve your problems that we don't know about. So that's what I recommend. Get everybody together. Don't try to do any work. Just talk through their issues, whatever their issues may be, because they might not want to talk because they might be saying, I already explained my issues and nobody want to do anything about it. And then what the human factors engineer would do is just sit there looking at the problems and try to put it in order from being the more serious problems to the least serious problems, and start from the top and work down.
So it's not really thank you for that, I agree. I think a lot of it is they were never empowered before. They never had somebody on the executive side paying attention to them or giving them any voice or power. So that's something I figured out. But also in our budget, I had to give the mayor's budget presentation, and I just spent half of it reciting the names of every single person that works on both sides because they're never acknowledged. And that alone was a huge start to start those conversations. So thank you so much.
Yeah, and the other thing I would tell you, I didn't share this slide tonight, but typically in the slide deck, I have something what I call an executive human factors council. And what it is, it's a human factors council that don't cost you any money other than time. That's money though. But it's led by an executive, and what it is every organization in your organization have a representative that works with a human factors engineer to work towards solving human problems. We had one when I was in the squadron, and we set it up. And what we did, we set it up for people to come forth to tell us that they were struggling. And what it did, it helped people who were mentally checked out from being in the cockpit. We was able to put them back in the training, in the simulators. We would do other things with them to keep them as current as possible, but it kept them from killing other people in the aircraft. Things like that really work. If you really want to know how fatigued your people are, have your executive human factors councils put together a survey. Find out how fatigued they are. Find out how complex your operations are. Find out why people are not performing at an optimum level.
I just wanted to add on to, there's associations, Information Systems Security Association, the InfraGard, Chicago Member Alliance could be some additional references for them.
Yeah.
We had 2 more. We had.
So I'll make mine really quick. So I teach a management of IT course at Northwestern, and primarily the course is about soft skills, teaching soft skills. What I'm seeing is from this human factor engineering piece, I really believe that management, leadership in IT really needs this, because they rely on them to basically be the go-to people for this type of problem solving, right? And I don't believe that a lot of these management or leaders are equipped to do this, that they need the knowledge. So are you also looking at introducing this type of learning for IT management or executive leadership type of curriculums? Because I think it's really valuable.
Yes, what you just talked about was my second dissertation. And so when I interviewed a lot of senior managers in cybersecurity and IT, they had no idea what human factors was really about, and they omitted it up front. So to answer your question, I'm working with two other people. I'm working with a psychologist and another human factors engineer, and we're trying to put together some curriculum. And we're definitely going to start with the executive side, but we're also going to put something together for the board side as well. Because what we find out is that a lot of board members, keep putting a lot of undue pressure, but they themselves don't really understand. And so we're going to start at executives, we're going to put one for the board, and we're going to put one for other people who might have an interest in just learning about human factors. And we're going to put it in a non-academic way. Because a lot of people don't want to come to class and feel like they got to take a test. And so we don't want that. We just want them to come in and learn and be able to take those skills and use them on the job.
Professor Nobles, you suggested something about stopping technology, but any company that tries to slow down technology will get left behind. Any country that tries to stop technology, for example, we're involved in a technology race with other countries like China, for example. Let's say we stop it here unilaterally in the US, they'll get ahead of us. So I don't know about how do you propose we stop technology?
So what I mean by stopping technology, I'm not mean stopping it for an extended long period of time, but stop and just do a quick check. Hey, where are we? Are we bringing the people along with us, or are we just leaving them behind? Or are we bringing the training programs with us, or are we leaving that behind too? Are we taking the complexity out of this, or are we just blowing everybody away, right? Because even with ChatGPT, as human factors engineers, we haven't even started to get our head wrapped around that. And I was just telling somebody earlier today, in the academic side of the house, when it comes to artificial intelligence, there's a platform out there called Jenny AI, Jenny.ai. I want you all to look it up, JENNI.ai. If I was to type in my title, Human Factors in Cybersecurity, and go to the next line, it writes the next sentence for me. And then ask me if I wanted to cite it. You see what I'm saying? How do we get our head wrapped around that? That's a true game changer. And so as a human factors engineer, it's a struggle for us. It's a real struggle right now. But to be honest with you, I'd rather be working with you all solving the cybersecurity problems and issues that we have than chasing the AI bug right now.
Thank you, Doctor.
All right, thank you to Dr. Calvin Nobles for a wonderful presentation. To wrap up the conference, I'm going to go ahead and invite Kasi Patruri, the chair of the conference, up for a few words.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you, Marissa. And thank you all for making this event a really successful one. And particularly the AV staff there and the volunteers, student volunteers, and the CISOs group, and mainly the speakers. Last minute, I pulled a lot of you, and I asked you, particularly Dr. Calvin Nobles. I didn't give him any time. I asked him, you have to really, fill in the open spot, within 24 hours, he could really, you saw what he said. So thank you all for that, and particularly our partner organizations and sponsors. So our sponsors, they wanted to give away some gift cards. So I hope you are here. It's let me see, Cyber6 Gill, they picked up Steve Weber, $3 card. And another one, Mark Shipman, Cook County. Mark. Okay, so I have your card here, so probably I'll mail it to him. So, all right, thank you all. And we have our networking session at Dillon's, and it's a corner of Adams and Dillon's, Clinton. So I'd like to see you all there. Right. Thank you. Thank you. Right. Yeah.